This is my update for Russian military operations in Ukraine for July 11th, 2022. And I'm going to go over these two Pentagon briefings and a couple of other things. They're both from July 8th, 2022. Links to them and everything else that I cover will be in the video description below. Both of these briefings are very similar. The main theme is HIMARS. And one of the briefings starts out with this little history lesson stretching all the way back to 2015 and how the US has been helping Ukraine all along. All of the training, equipment, and weapons that they transferred to Ukraine for the last 7 to 8 years, they claim that that is what is helping Ukraine face Russia. But not really. I mean, we can see that Ukraine is losing. They're taking huge losses in the Donbas region. They have launched multiple counteroffensives outside of Kharkov toward the Russian border and outside of Kherson in the south, and they have all failed. Nothing has materialized in Ukraine's favor. The only thing that they can really point to is Snake Island, which is a tiny rock with no strategic significance. This is a major victory that the West is celebrating because they have nothing else to point to on the battlefield. The Pentagon claims that in the opening phases of Russia's military operations, all of this support helped Ukraine. And again, it's this misconception that Russia actually thought they were going to fight, surround, and take Kiev when there was an act of resistance there. That is not what Russia was doing. They surged into the country toward these targeted population centers. Some of them collapsed with almost no fighting at all. Kherson is an example of this. Almost the entire south of Ukraine was taken using this strategy. In other places, it wasn't going to work, but it was worth a try because if you could stop the conflict in just days rather than months, you would have saved tens of thousands of lives and all of this death and destruction that has followed. But Russian contingency planning knew full well they were fully prepared for protracted conflict. They staged huge amounts of weapons, munitions, and other equipment for protracted conflict all along Ukraine's border before this ever started. And so that is a misconception that the Pentagon to this day is still perpetuating. They said once that opening phase was over and Russia settled into this protracted conflict that, again, they were fully prepared for, the Pentagon's help for Ukraine shifted as well. And they started sending howitzers, the M777s. They sent over 100 of them. They said this was to help Ukraine in what was essentially now an artillery fight. And that artillery fight was taking place primarily around Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, and Ukraine lost. They lost completely, and they're retreating. They are falling back on the battlefield towards Slavyansk-Kramatorsk. There's a defense line in between Russian forces and Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. It's the Bakhmut-Siversk defense line. I've shown it on maps before. And this is what Russia is working its way towards now. This is the next focus for Russia. So the M777s, this assistance from the US has not helped Ukraine. Ukraine is now losing. They're losing so badly that even the Western media is admitting this. Even Ukraine itself is admitting this. And I'll get into that further on. Now, the Pentagon says they're in a new phase of assisting Ukraine. Now they're sending these HIMARS, multiple launch rocket systems. They fire guided rockets up to 70 kilometers, and they're claiming that this is going to change everything. It's a new phase of aid for Ukraine. Ukrainians are using them. It's really working out well. I had thought that there were 4 in country, but the Pentagon says there's already 8. And I was looking at claimed strikes by Ukraine, and I thought, well, that sounds about right for 4, but not now that I know that they've had 8 in the country. That's actually pretty bad, that the number of strikes that they're carrying out versus the number of systems that they claim to have on the battlefield. It's actually not that impressive. They're going to send another 4, so in total they'll have sent 12. Now, the Pentagon, one of these briefings says, what we've seen now as the United States surges HIMARS systems and the missiles for those systems, that Ukraine has now been successfully striking Russian locations in Ukraine deeper behind the front lines and disrupting Russia's ability to conduct that artillery operation. And I have seen no evidence of this. And I have seen the Western media infer, I think that they're inferring that this pause that Russia seems to be in the middle of is somehow Ukraine beating back the Russians. And it just isn't so. They just took over 2 industrial and urban centers combined have over 200,000 people, a population of over 200,000 people, and the surrounding areas that they have taken in the last 2 or 3 weeks. It's a huge amount of territory. They're consolidating control over it. And all while they're doing that, they're still incrementally moving forward on the battlefield. They're taking these villages in the direction toward the Bakhmut defense line. And they're also moving closer and closer to Slavyansk. Also, there's an eastern front moving west and one from north moving south towards Slavyansk. Now, of course, all of the Western media at these briefings during the questions and answers, this is all they're asking about the HIMARS, because the Pentagon's trying to sell them as a game changer. And the Western media, they can see that this is not going well for Ukraine. So they keep asking questions, trying to figure out or see some initial evidence that, yes, it is actually changing the game. And when asked why it's taking so long to send additional HIMARS to Ukraine, this is what the Pentagon says. The HIMARS system is a very high-end system. And so there was a, I would say, weeks-long training process where Ukrainian crews needed to be trained on these systems. They were new to them because it's not a Soviet legacy system and it's a higher end capability. And another one of the briefings said, so for our artillerymen, they're talking about American artillerymen, we send them to school at Fort Sill. They go through several months of training and then they're deployed. What they're doing for Ukraine in these HIMARS is giving them like a 4-week crash course and then sending them out into actual battle, which is not going to get crews out onto the battlefield fighting effectively. It just isn't. Now, the Pentagon is saying, well, they're only training for 4 weeks, but they're doing such a great job. They're employing the HIMARS so effectively. But this is exactly what they said about the M777 howitzers. They said that they're learning it quickly. They're doing a great job. We're getting feedback from them out in the field. They're really using the M777 effectively. I think even the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, was saying this. And of course, it's the M777 that they were using as they were losing the Battle of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. And as Russian forces approached the Bakhmut defense line and as Russian forces approach Slavyansk-Kramatorsk. And the M777 howitzer and the HIMARS, all of these systems that the US is sending, these are supposed to be used in a combined arms fashion. When the United States uses HIMARS, they don't just have it sitting out on the battlefield by itself, firing rockets at the enemy. They assume that they will have air superiority using their air force. They will have a significant number of troops, including armor, out on the battlefield. They will have artillery of all kinds. They will have all of this out on the battlefield working together in a combined arms fashion. This allows the HIMARS to do its work. It keeps it protected. It keeps it, far behind enemy lines. It prevents the enemy from ever taking them out because they're too busy dealing with the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Army, the U.S. Marine Corps. Ukraine doesn't have any of this. They have a minimum of all of this, and none of it constitutes a combined arms effort on the battlefield. This is the problem. And when you have HIMARS out on the battlefield, even if the crews are using them effectively, they're supposed to be part of a combined arms strategy, and they do not have a combined arms force out on the battlefield. This leaves the HIMARS extremely vulnerable, and this is probably why Russia has already taken out 2 of them. Here's a Reuters article. Russia says it destroyed 2 U.S. HIMARS in East Ukraine. Kiev rejects claim. The article says Moscow said it had destroyed 2 launchers for the high mobility artillery rocket systems HIMARS that the United States and its allies have been supplying to Kiev. It also said Russian forces destroyed 2 ammunition depots storing rockets for the HIMARS near the front line in a village south of Kramatorsk in Ukraine's Donetsk region, the main focus for Russian troops after the capture of Lugansk on Sunday. And I had said that if Ukraine uses the HIMARS near where the main fighting is taking place, that is where Russia has concentrated its counter-battery efforts, they're going to find and destroy these HIMARS. And for Ukraine to say no, they didn't, for anyone to doubt that Russia has destroyed HIMARS, Russia has shown very clear footage of it destroying heavy weapons of all kinds sent to Ukraine by the United States, by its allies. This is something that Russia is obviously capable of doing. This is why the US has to continuously send more heavy weapons. The Russians destroyed all of Ukraine's heavy weapons that they had at the beginning of this conflict on February 24th, 2022. So it's a capability that Russia clearly has. I don't understand why people would doubt that they hit these HIMARS. I mean, it's just a truck with a rocket launcher attached to the back of it. Now, if Ukraine uses these HIMARS along the periphery, away from the main fighting, they'll probably have a much easier time of taking out targets, and the HIMARS will be less vulnerable to counter-battery efforts. But the whole point is to stop the main Russian force. That is what's destroying Ukraine's military and taking cities. It's not what's going on along the periphery. So that's also something to keep in mind. Now, here's an article from the Wall Street Journal. It's Ukraine's defense minister says it has passed test on new US guided rockets, needs more. The article says Ukraine's defense minister said his country has passed the test with its successful use of recently delivered American long-range artillery systems, but stressed the high attrition rate along its extensive front line has made the demand for additional supplies such as armored vehicles and drones more urgent. Alexei Reznikov said the need for longer-range weapons continues to outpace the Ukrainians' demand for shorter-range systems as the war shifts primarily to an artillery battle, and more will be needed if they are to recapture territory lost since Russia invaded on February 24th. We need to refresh our platoons and change them and make replacements, also because we have a lot of losses, he said in an interview with the Wall Street Journal. We are waiting for more armor, more weaponry from our partners. We need to rebuild some directions and to refresh our fortifications and plan a new operational strategy. Sounds like they're losing. That's what that sounds like. And keep in mind what he just said. Keep in mind what he just said. Ukraine is suffering high attrition rates. They need more armored vehicles because all the armored vehicles they had are destroyed. They're out of them. They need more drones. They need more drones. And if you read this whole article, they will talk about how the drones the US and other nations are giving them are all being jammed by Russia. Russian electronic warfare is jamming all of their drones, making them useless for whatever it is that they're trying to use them for. So they said they need more drones that somehow can overcome this challenge. Keep all of this in mind. This is what he's saying. They need all of this stuff or they're not going to be able to take any territory back that they've lost since February 24th. The Wall Street Journal article also says, he said the M142 high mobility artillery rocket systems, the long-range launchers known as HIMARS, have been a game changer, enabling Ukraine to target Russian forces in the northeastern town of Izium, but added, the war is grim, we need more, we need it quickly. And yes, obviously, 4 HIMARS, 8 HIMARS, 12 HIMARS, 20 HIMARS, this is not going to win the war for Ukraine. You don't just get 20 rocket launchers and somehow win a whole war just with these rocket launchers. And if Ukrainian forces are being obliterated, according to even the defense minister, they're not going to have the ability to protect these systems, these advanced weapon systems that the West is sending. And we have seen video after video of Russia destroying heavy weapon systems of all kinds sent by the West. Then there's this Financial Times article. Military briefing. Is the West running out of ammunition to supply Ukraine? Now, I've shown other articles from the Western media about this very topic. The Financial Times says, the Ukraine war has exposed the skimpiness of Western defense stockpiles, especially of unglamorous but crucial supplies such as artillery shells that had been the mainstay of fighting. Lack of production capacity, labor shortages, and supply chain snafus, especially computer chips, mean long lead times to replenish them. The shortages, defense officials and analysts say, revealed the West's complacency about potential threats since the end of the Cold War, now shown up by the desire to shore up Ukraine with military support. Fetishes for high-tech weaponry and lean manufacturing have obscured the importance of maintaining stockpiles of basic kit, they add. And the article also says, those scarcities may now be impinging on the West's ability to quartermaster Kiev's war effort. Total annual U.S. production of 155mm artillery shells, for example, would last less than 2 weeks of combat in Ukraine, according to Alex Vershinin, a U.S. procurement expert who says the conflict marks the return of industrial warfare. These are problems that are going to take years to solve. It's not going to help Ukraine. Maybe by the next war the U.S. starts with someone else, they may have solved these problems. But for this conflict, no, they're not going to be able to solve this in time for Ukraine to somehow pull this off. You need to brace yourself for this one. You just heard the defense minister of Ukraine, Oleksiy Reznikov, say that all his men are dying. He's out of tanks. He needs more tanks. None of the drones that he's got are working. They need to reconstitute their forces. That was an article from July 10th. This is also an article from the Times, UK Times, from July 10th. Ukraine has 1 million ready for fight back to recapture South. And this is the same exact defense minister saying this. Now he's saying that Ukraine has a 1 million-man army and they're going to use it to storm southern Ukraine and take back all of its coastal regions. And the article says, Ukraine is massing a 1 million-strong fighting force equipped with Western weapons to recover its southern territory from Russia, the nation's defense minister has revealed to the Times. In his first interview with a British newspaper since the invasion began, Oleksiy Reznikov said President Zelensky had ordered Ukraine's military to retake occupied coastal areas, which are vital to the country's economy. The article also says, we have approximately 700,000 in the armed forces. And when you add National Guard, police, border guard, we are around 1 million. British soldiers are already training 2 battalions of Ukrainian soldiers in England as part of Boris Johnson's pledge to train 10,000 troops every 120 days. So first of all, Ukraine has 700,000 troops, or they had 700,000 troops, if even. And to put this number in perspective, I want you to check out this Al Jazeera article, Troop Numbers, Foreign Soldiers in Iraq. And it says, when the US invaded Iraq in 2003, they had about 150,000 troops, 150,000 troops. Ukraine is saying they have 700,000 troops. And that number regarding Iraq, I've seen many different numbers. There's somewhere between 120,000, 170,000, somewhere in there. And it all depends on how you're counting it. But it's still a very small fraction of 700,000 that the Ukrainians claim they have right now. Right now they say this. So the exact same Oleksiy Reznikov, who said they're losing all of their men to attrition rates, the tanks are all gone. They need more tanks. They need more long-range artillery. They're still being completely outgunned. He's now saying that they've got 700,000 troops ready to go. Do they have equipment for these 700,000 troops? Do they have equipment for them? What kind of training do they have? Or are these just names on a piece of paper? Are these just names on a piece of paper that he thinks represents the number of forces Ukraine has at its disposal? How are these names on a piece of paper going to do when you put them up against the actual Russian forces that are physically in Ukraine's south? And then the Times article says, this is about the UK training program. The British effort will help boost the Ukrainian army after heavy losses defending the Donbas region in the face of a massed Russian artillery onslaught, where President Zelensky said Ukraine was losing as many as 200 men a day. That's the Times saying that, and they're quoting the Ukrainian president. So again, you see how none of this adds up. Nothing that Ukraine is saying adds up. So let's do the math. 10,000 troops every 120 days. Ukraine says they're losing 200 every single day. 120 times 200 is 24,000. So the UK would be training less than half of what Ukraine loses on the battlefield during that training period, 120 days. Now, here is another article on the British training. It's from the BBC. Russia-Ukraine war. UK training program gets underway. And the article says, some 22,000 Ukrainian service personnel have already been trained by the UK through Operation Orbital between 2015 and 2022. So this was part of the US, UK, NATO effort to build up Ukrainian forces to eventually wage a proxy war against Russia. And we again, it goes back to February 24th. They had this army that they built up over the course of 8 years, and it was not able to stop Russia. It couldn't stop Russia from taking Kherson, encircling and taking Mariupol, encircling and destroying Ukrainian forces all across the Donbas, taking Severodonetsk, taking Lysychansk, pushing the Ukrainians back. They couldn't stop Russia from doing all of that. What are they going to do in the middle of a war that they're losing to build up a force that's even stronger than that? It's a fantasy. Now, I want to give you a metric to compare this British 120-day training program. I used to be a U.S. Marine. I did basically 3 months of training, basic training, and then I did another month or so of combat training. I was not an infantryman, so I did less combat training than an infantryman would do. And when I was done, I really didn't feel like I was prepared to go into battle, better than if I wasn't trained at all. But you would want to at least go through Marine Corps infantry training. So this is Marines.com. They're talking about recruit training. It's 13 weeks or 91 days long. And then, also from Marine.com, preparing for the operating forces. They talk about the combat training or infantry training that you do once your basic training is over. And it says you go to an infantry training battalion and it's 59 days long. So that's a total of 150 days for a US Marine to go from a basic recruit to a properly trained infantryman, but a basic entry-level infantryman. It's 150 days. So the British are going to train these Ukrainians for less time than that, and they're going to throw them right into the middle of an actual war. And I want to point something out to you. When a U.S. Marine gets to the fleet and they go into the unit that they're assigned to, they don't know anything. They have no experience. They have basic skills. They require leadership. They require non-commissioned officers, so that would be like sergeants and above. They also need officers. It takes years to create a non-commissioned officer or an officer capable of effectively leading men on the battlefield. I don't know how they're going to account for that. So what does all of this add up to? This adds up to dragging this out for as long as possible, killing as many people as possible until Ukraine inevitably loses. Does not add up to Ukraine winning. This is because the US refuses to admit that it lost this proxy war, just like in Syria. So the priority becomes dragging it out for as long as possible, increasing the amount of suffering as much as possible, but also profiting from it as much as possible. And even if you're supporting Ukraine, you want Ukraine to win this. You don't understand why Russia is in Ukraine, and you want to see Ukraine prevail. At this point, you have to see that this is what the West is doing. They're using Ukraine to fight a proxy war against Russia. They do not care about Ukraine. They don't have a plan, an actual plan. I know they say that they do, but they don't actually have a plan, a viable plan for Ukraine to win. And this isn't just me speculating. There are policy papers produced by Western think tanks like this one from the RAND Corporation from 2019 extending Russia. And they basically say that in order to weaken and undermine Russia, here's a list of things we can do. None of these options say build up a prosperous Ukraine on Russia's border. No, instead, it says arming, providing lethal aid to Ukraine. And it says expanding U.S. assistance to Ukraine, including lethal military assistance, would likely increase the costs to Russia in both blood and treasure of holding the Donbas region. More Russian aid to the separatists and an additional Russian troop presence would likely be required, leading to larger expenditures, equipment losses, and Russian casualties. The latter could become quite controversial at home, as it did when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. So you notice they didn't say anything about defending Ukraine or enabling Ukraine to win in a conflict with Russia. They just said bleeding Russia using Ukraine at Ukraine's expense. And this is a suicidal policy for Ukraine. It's going to completely destroy the country. And that's why the US had to overthrow the elected government of Ukraine and put people who are unreasonable in their place, because only unreasonable people would go along with an agenda like this, a self-destructive agenda like this. So I just hope that this all makes it extremely clear to people, even people who are adamant about their support for Ukraine, that the West has no interest in Ukraine winning. They know that it's not possible. It's not going to happen. They're just trying to drag this out for as long as possible. They truly are fighting Russia to the last Ukrainian. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing to my channel. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. If you're watching this on YouTube in particular, check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. I'm on Telegram. I do regular updates on that every single day. I'm also on Rumble and Odyssey, where all of my videos are automatically backed up, just in case YouTube deletes my channel. Also in the video description below are all of the references that I used for this video, as well as ways you can help support my work. You could do that through Buy Me a Coffee, through Patreon, and also PayPal. To everyone who has been helping me out, whether it's month-to-month donations, one-time donations, or even if you're just helping share my work with other people, getting the word out, I appreciate all of that. I could not do this work without that support. So thank you, and as always, thank you for watching.